for later. But Amina does have a question, so let's get to that. I'm working on a knowledge-based bot. Oh yeah, I think you mentioned this last week as well. And I'm struggling with making it work. All right. My problem is if the example isn't in the NLU.yaml, the assistant won't. Oh, okay.
Sorry,
My
was
internet
gone.
connection is unstable.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah.
Disconnected. That's great. All right. If it reconnects quickly, we won't have a bunch of smaller videos. Oh, come on, come on, come on. My stream is experiencing issues. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, cool.
And we're back. Sorry about that. Amina, and I hope that we are still on the same URL, and we'll find out in just a second. Amina says, I'm struggling to make my knowledge-based bot work. If the example isn't in the NLU.yaml, the assistant won't get it even if there is a specific intent and entity.
Good question. I've never worked with knowledge based before in Rasa open source, to be honest. I think Tanya did most of the implementation for that. But as far as I remember from reviewing the code, yeah, you will have to add like a lot of examples that it gets in the kind of in the right categories, right? I would be wondering like how many examples do you have for the specific intent?
Also, sorry, that me making faces is we are not in fact on the same video anymore because the timeout was long enough that YouTube killed the stream. So now we're in another stream where the title is different. So let me pop that over here. Okay, sorry about that. This is not ideal, and I hope that we don't have to run into any more problems with this. Okay, so the example isn't in the NLU, and the assistant will go to their specific event. So are you saying that you don't have any training data at all for that particular intent and entity? Or that the training data is all in the knowledge base, and you didn't add it to your NLU.yaml file? And I think it's going to take a while for, unfortunately for Mina to catch up with us. But if you don't have any text examples of people saying the things that you want your assistant to pick out in your training data, the Raza assistant won't do that. Does that make sense? I don't know that I'm explaining this very well.
So I just looked at the knowledge base example bot. So if you go to the Rasa open source repository, there is a directory called examples, and there is an assistant in there called knowledge base bot. And so the way it works is that you have one intent to query the knowledge base. Basically, all sorts of queries for your knowledge base just go into this one intent.
Let me pull up the browser.
So I think like depending on how similar these queries for your knowledge base are, you need more or less examples that the NLU interpreter can actually like pick that up and learn to detect that. So I think this like example just has like around 20, 30 examples, but I think you need actually way more. Depends also on your pipeline.
Yeah. Okay, so there's, oh, okay. So there's a couple of intents, one for querying the attribute, one for querying the entities, but a lot of the solve entity. Okay, interesting. Amina says, I do have training data if I ask a question in another way.
Then yeah, well, then I would also just add this to the training data. How many examples? That would be really interesting, and also which model configuration you're using. So which like pipeline are you using? Pre-trained embeddings, or are you using the count vectorizer in Rasa open source? Because if you don't use pre-trained embeddings, right, then you need more data so that these embeddings can be trained properly.
Hmm. Yeah, I hope that helps. Amina, and there is a little bit of a lag between us and you, so please feel free to clarify, if we're not answering your exact question. All right. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit flustered because of the connection issues. Not my favorite thing to deal with, unfortunately. And if you're interested in checking this code out yourself, it's the Raza HQ GitHub, and it's tutorial knowledge base. I think there's also a blog post about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think Tanya definitely worked on. So as far as I know, knowledge base is still experimental. So any feedback on this is like highly appreciated.
Yeah, so please do, if you run into anything, ask about it on the forum. I know you can't see this, Tobias. There's a little pop-up that has a forum URL on it.
I'm actually viewing the live stream as well, so I can see
Oh,
the
good.
questions.
You can see it. All right. Go to the browser. It says, if I ask a question that isn't in the list of examples, then it's not picked up.
But then I would also say that you need to make your NLU model more robust, right? Which means like adding more examples. So this is also where conversation-driven development comes in, right? You as a developer, when you start designing your bot, you have like a certain way you ask questions. Like even if you try to think outside of the box, right, it unfortunately doesn't really work, right? Like as soon as you give it just to like some friend, for example, they will just ask like in a completely different way right away. It would just break your assistant. So we just encourage you to just give it to a couple of friends, friends and family, kind of, and have them use it, and this should make your bot like a lot more robust.
Definitely. It says, I'm new, so I'm trying a bunch of different stuff, different pipelines and policies. I'm sorry, there's like, oh no, not a problem at all. I to sort of build on what Tobias said, particularly in the early rounds of development, if your assistant isn't picking up things that are similar to the things that you've seen it before, I would spend my time getting more training data rather than trying to do much tuning at this time. Particularly if you're using English and 2.x, the default pipeline should be pretty good for the majority of cases. Oops, sorry, I'm hitting my desk. Just flailing.
Actually pretty interested. So what's your use case, for like by using knowledge bases? So yeah, what's the use case for your assistant? Sounds really interesting. And yeah, research is always kind of optimizing the default pipeline to work for like the majority of assistants. So ideally, there should be no need to fine tune that too early on in your Raza lifecycle.
If you are using a language that's not like doesn't have a lot of pre-trained stuff for it though, then it might be worthwhile to spend some time, messing with your pipeline a little bit earlier on in the development cycle. Like if you're building your own tokenizer, for example, you probably want to do that first. It's gonna be hard to work without tokens.
You're currently also working, or Vincent is actually working on adding support for Spacey 3.0, and Spacey 3.0 has a lot more languages supported by models. So then there are hopefully like way more pre-trained embeddings for more languages, which will hopefully even like make it easier for people to get started.
Yeah. That is good. Are we? Sorry, I'm just noticing that the video, there we go. Okay, never mind. No longer has the live token. It is still there. I thought we'd created a new video. I mean, it says, I'll need to add different examples. Yeah, that's what I do. Oh. And I like Tobias's recommendation of just sort of like asking a bunch of people. Like, if you wanted to do this, how would you say it to a bot?
Yeah, usually you think you're so creative in coming up with different examples, but then once you just give it to somebody else, they will just come up with like something which will just break it right away. Yeah.
My assistant should be in French. Our French is pretty well supported. Should be okay. And I started with an example where you have restaurants and hotels. Okay, so someone's like, I need to book a hotel. Or like, does this hotel let you bring your dog? I don't know, is that a thing in Europe? Can you bring your dog to hotels?
I mean, I used to make like vacation with my grandparents in Switzerland, and there you could bring a dog. But I never brought a dog to a hotel in Germany. But I guess some, I mean, must be allowed, right?
Right, let's service animals for sure. It's rare, but not that rare in the US. We just started our journey to build a chatbot. Yeah, it is a rewarding journey, I would say. Yeah, keep us updated. I would love to hear how this goes. Betula says, what's the best way to learn Raza? I mean, that's going to depend on you and how you learn best. But we do have a Raza for Beginners course, or beginners, on Udemy that is free. So if you enjoy having like a structured course, I might recommend that. And that's udemy.com/course/Raza-for-beginners. So that's one way. You can look through our example code. So you're looking at this example assistant here. We have quite a bit on our in our GitHub. So different types of assistants. Yeah, I don't know. What would you do?
Question. I mean, like, I think we have so many resources that it works for every type of learner, right? Like, I think like people are learning in different ways, right? So I mean, your and Vincent's YouTube videos, they're amazing. So I know, for example, a couple of Razas actually started out with these YouTube videos, and they're super excited about it. I personally, whenever I learn something, I just want to try it out and then just learn as I go. And I think in that case, the forum is super helpful because whenever you face a problem, just ask in the forum or find somebody in there. And there also are like in-depth YouTube videos by Vincent right on the machine learning components. If you actually want to dive like into fine-tuning some point later on. There's also a ton of blog posts, right? Like, yeah, I think whatever works for you. I think this is very specific to the person and how you learn.
Also, I remembered something I forgot. The Raza Playground. Playground's great.
Oh, yeah, that's the obvious answer. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And this is just a way where you can sort of, these are all editable. So it's a way that you can play around with an assistant and write some intents and actually train it and then chat with it right in the browser before you have to download anything to just sort of, you know, get a vibe. All right, Amina says, so talking about building the chatbot, my instinct was to understand how it works for a restaurant and then adapt it to our use case. Yeah, I think that could definitely work. I have only worked with knowledge bases in the most superficial of manners. and my gut instinct is the more familiar you are with the knowledge base itself, the easier your life will be as you're building the assistant. But if you like to work from a specific example, I'm not gonna say don't do that. And he says you can ring your dog in France. Ah, interesting. Arya says, in the US, they also don't allow dogs to be left alone in the hotel room, even if you can bring one. Oh. That was good information. That makes sense. I know we also have, like, hotels for dogs, like boarding kennels.
Yeah, same for us in Germany.
And Rachel says, thank you so much. You're very welcome. Yeah, welcome to Raza. All right, Arya has interesting question. Generative art in video game development is up and coming. Has Raza been used in that way, but for text, maybe interacting with NPCs? NPCs here being non-player characters. Ooh, who built that Unity project with Raza?
Yeah, I also had to think of that one. Didn't Vincent also wanted to play code a text-based game, or you?
Yeah, that was Vincent. He sorry, I'm just pulling up the Unity example. Yeah, it's a breakout bot. It's on our YouTube channel, and it's sort of a nod to text-based adventure games of yore. And then there's an example here of a Raza Unity integration. And I think there was something at L3AI as well. Someone had a nice demo of like a little Coconut Island. Does that sound right?
I've not seen this talk.
Oh, let's see if I can find it. As for like purely, generative text, also I might have made up the name Coconut Island based on my my search right now.
But I can't see anything blocking to use it in a game, right? So it depends, I guess, a little bit on the game, like how different the levels are. If they like very different use cases, I don't know. One is like on the moon, and the other one is on Earth in a restaurant. Then you might need like different models, or have to build a very robust bot. But in general, like hooking it up to a game shouldn't be a big problem, right? Like you got the REST API for Raza, and you.
Ooh. Oh no. Oh, you're back. Okay. You did warn me that your connection might be a little. Oh, my connection is bad. Cool. Well, hopefully we don't break the stream up again. Yeah. Arya says, what was the one with GPT-3? GPT Dungeon. So we don't, I mean, at least I don't really recommend using those sort of like neural language models to generate text and then sending that text to people, just because it, maybe in a game context, but certainly in like a commercial context, it will lie, right? It'll produce things that sound like they could be real that aren't. And also it will generate abusive language, which certainly I want to avoid serving to people. So on that end, I would probably avoid fully generated like end-to-end text, but having people be able to interact a little bit more realistically with characters, I think would be really fun. And also I cannot find the talk I'm looking for at all. I remember seeing the talk. What do I remember about it? Not enough, apparently. Well, anyway. Yeah, so I think the Unity integration is the most sort of gamey thing that I've seen. Yeah. Is this, sorry, I'm paranoid now. Are we still in the same video? We are, fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna have to go through and fix the YouTube videos. That's okay. I'm gonna check the chat. Lazy is playing Rachel's a genius as a claim. I don't think so. I don't. Measuring intelligence, I think, is, as somebody with a social science background, a why, like what are your goals in doing that, and B, usually a reflection of other social things, like is this in your native language or is it in your second language? So I don't know, I'm leery of comparative smartness. Yeah, Arya says, I met within a game, so the way to using a chatbot to talk back and forth. I'll see if I can find the video I'm thinking about and post on Twitter. Yeah, please do. Feel free to tag me. Or Raza. I believe we're Raza HQ on Twitter. Yeah, it sounds interesting. Yeah, it should definitely be doable. And I can also pull up some of Vincent's things. I'm pretty sure Breakout Bot is, like, clearly it's not exactly the same thing, right? Maybe that's not clear. So you're not talking with an individual character, but you're interacting with the assistant through text-based stuff. So if you're interested in...
But in a way, this is very similar, right? Because you can ask the assistant anything, just like, I mean, if you have like a UI or just some in-game world, then this shouldn't be much different, actually. Yeah.
Oh, actually, you know what I should do? Sorry, I just realized that I never pasted the new thing in the comments. Of the first video, so because the chat is gone now, we won't be able to see it. Connection issues. Anyway, so we're waiting for more questions. Have you had a chance to work on any assistants recently on your own, or have you just been working on open source stuff?
I've been working on any assistants in ages, to be honest. So when I started at Raza, I actually started as solutions architect back then, so working with customers. So back then, I worked way more with assistants. Either like we had this like dog fooding project at Raza, the Sarah assistant, Raza demo on GitHub. And then I just like talked through like all these assistants our customers had back then. But yeah, like recently I didn't have any, like, I haven't been really in touch with any assistants, except from small examples. Yeah. Our customer success team is handling most of that.
This is the Sarah project that you were talking about, who I don't believe is currently live, but may yet rise again. And if you're looking for an example of question answering and sort of open-ended stuff, this is a good example. I should have had one more coffee this morning. I feel like I'm a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, Sarah is definitely like very advanced by it, because I think like it's easier to build assistants once you have like a very kind of a problem to solve, right? And if your users are coming to your assistants and having like a specific question, then it's way easier to handle their conversation path, while it's way harder for these like open topic assistants as Raza is. So sometimes when like users just tried it out on our website, they just tried to break it, which I can understand that, right? Like you're going to this website, of this tool, and then you just want to try out what it can do. It's just very hard to build a very good bot. But I think that's why like the demo and the repository is just a really great example, just to look through and how we do certain things there.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I think it's a good, I don't know, it's a warning story, but sort of an ethos to go into building an assistant with is like, what's the smallest problem I can solve? And then start very narrow. And then once that's working, start to like, build on out. Robbie says, I don't think anyone likes text-based games nowadays. Oh, people definitely play text-based games. Definitely a thing. Maybe not like what the big game development studios are doing, but very much alive and well. Komoda, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, says, I need to develop an API to get user messages and return bot responses. I'm currently trying with Fast API. Can you point me to a tutorial or a code example? I can use. I am new to both Raza and API. To get user messages and return the bot response. I mean, depending on what it is specifically that you want to do, shoot, go away. Sorry.
I mean, you have two options, right? Like you can either use Raza through the command line interface, so you don't have to do any coding. You can just use, like, so Raza exposes everything via an API. So either a REST API, then also more advanced API where you can actually get like all the nitty-gritty details of the events, for example, in a conversation. But then you can also build specific input-output channels, which can also allow you to like define a specific interface. Usually, like what you're currently speaking about should be just covered by the default REST channel, so you don't have to do any coding. If you actually want to build your own API around Raza, which I wouldn't recommend just because it's already been done by us, then you can definitely do that using Fast API, but then you would kind of need to get down to the Python API of Raza, which is not as transparent as it probably could be. And there's one entry in the docs about Jupyter Notebooks, so I would probably start there and how this works.
Yeah, if you can though, I would use the one that already exists. That's what I do because I'm efficient. I don't like building things I don't have to build.
There's also just a lot of things Raza gives you right out of the box, right? So this is kind of the server and the command line interface to it. Then, well, we're actively maintaining the server, right? So it's kind of optimized for the usage. Then we also ship this as Docker images, and we got an entire DevOps team kind of optimizing these Docker images, making sure there are no security vulnerabilities in there, making sure the Docker image size is small. So this is like there's an entire team kind of doing the work for you. So this is why I wouldn't recommend building this again. Yeah.
I hope that helps. Ara says, they still have a player base, but it's also usable within a non-text-based game where you want the non-player characters to be interactive. So you, instead of having like a dialogue tree for talking to a character, you use text. Randy says, any sense of whether Raza will interact with NVIDIA Jarvis and particularly Auto 2 Face? I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know any of these terms, to be honest.
All right, so this is all fictional. These are all things that are not real systems. Application framework for multimodal conversational API for services. Multimodal. Oh, okay. So like all the servers, we can go see it. I'm gonna say I don't know the answer to your question. I know that Maddie is giving a talk at an NVIDIA conference maybe next month, maybe before next month. Retrained conversational NVIDIA 12 I don't know. It sounds like they're doing some of the same stuff that we're doing, so.
It seems like more like a general approach, right, to all sorts of models. So not just like language models or NLP.
Yeah. Good question, Randy. I have no idea. Yeah. Amina says, Moda says, I will try using the existing API. Yes, I hope it makes your life easier. What I noticed in Raza Assistance is that there's always file data, NLU.yaml, stories, roles, config domain. How do these files interact with each other, in which order, and are they mandatory? That is a great question. And I think Tobias is a great person to answer that. So I'm just opening up a...
Yeah, so this question is getting more and more complicated over time. So historically, back in the very early days, Raza Core and Raza, so Raza consisted out of two libraries called Raza Core and Raza NLU. This is still kind of like, although this has merged everything like now into Raza open source, it's kind of internally still two models. You got the NLU model, which uses your NLU.yaml file, and this model will just will classify the messages to kind of assign an intent and predict an intent for a message. But it will also extract entities, for example, email addresses, numbers, these kind of things. And then you got the Raza core part, which uses stories and rules. This is the dialogue management part. And the dialogue management part kind of will decide what the assistant should do next based on the current message and the conversation history, so the context of the conversation. So NLU goes for the NLU models and stories and rules, and the domain also goes to the Raza core model. The config is the model configuration, so this contains configuration for both Raza core and Raza NLU model. So this is kind of like the requirement you need to actually get started. Yeah, I said this is getting more and more complicated. The way this is that we recently introduced a feature called end-to-end support for Raza. Yeah, so these like historically very split approaches, like the model which detects intent and extracts entities, and then the dialogue management models, like they're kind of merging closer and closer together. So Raza core, or the policy model, actually does not require intents any longer. This is currently an experimental feature. So everything is kind of melting together at this point. So it's getting harder and harder to say in which order and what is used for what, because just both models are taking information out of all these files.
Sorry, I'm just trying to pull up an example of an assistant that is in 2.x rather than 1.x. And the specific files that you're always going to need, config, domain. I mean, this might change in some future version of Raja, but currently, config and domain, you definitely need. Like requirements.txt is next, you don't need it, but I would recommend it strongly. Same with the license, you don't need it, but I would strongly recommend it. And then the NLU and stories. And as of 2.x, we're a little bit more flexible as to what training data goes in what file and what they're called. But the default would be, the NLU and the stories and the rules if you have it. So I hope that helps. Those are sort of the minimum ones.
Since we have the new YAML training data since Raza Open Source 2.0, you can actually mix all of these files in just one file. So you don't have to split it, but it's still kind of nice to have this division in your head, right? Because you don't want to have like these 1,000-line files and then have to find certain things.
And especially as you start adding like a lot more training data, they get a lot of scrolling. Fingers get tired. Hey, Hassan. Amina says, when to use machine learning policies and when to use rule-based policies, and does it make sense to use both? Great question. I wonder what's on this one.
Can try to quote Vova on this, so a researcher on our team. So he says, like, ideally you would use rules for everything because they will always work, right? But to make actually rules which work in every case, you have to add a lot of rules. So this is not really scalable. So this is why we have machine learning policies. So it makes sense to use policies like the memorization policy or the rule policy to kind of cover your most important paths. But then you want to have the machine learning policies to kind of cover all the other paths, because users will just diverge or they will have slightly different patterns, and it's very hard to maintain all of these different conversation paths. So yes, you should use them together.
Yes. This is an example of sort of using a couple together. And I think this is sort of the recommended thing right now, is that you use a rule policy if you need it. The augmented memorization policy says, hey, if I showed you an example of this in the training data, or like these sort of couple of conversational turns next to each other, do the thing that you saw in the training data. And the TED policy is like, if we don't have a rule and you haven't seen exactly this thing in the training data, you know, guess based on the information that you've given. So I would recommend, you know, some combination of the memorization policy and a machine learning policy and a rule policy if you need it. And I'm like,
yeah, we usually recommend the rule.
Rules don't.
Sorry. Yeah. We usually recommend the rule policy as well, like for like FAQs. So if you have like things which just can come, which can occur in every point of the conversation, then the rule policy makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're gonna say like, okay, whenever a person asks for pizza, you're gonna give them pizza, and so this is nothing you can really, you can't write stories, right, with every possible occurrence of like when users ask for pizza in between. So this is where rules are very, very handy. Or for example, you always want to say hi when a user also says hi, things like that. But for everything else, you should always use the memorization policy and machine learning policies.
I hope that helps, Amina. Asam says, did you explain components like entity and intent extraction in previous videos? Yeah, we have quite a few videos on the NLU side of things, and I think I specifically have. I know there's an NLP for developers specifically on intents. I don't know that is one on entities, but yeah, there should be others in the YouTube channel. I can make this bigger. Are we allowed to edit the core model and base it on an LSTM? Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're open source. Feel free.
I think there was once a policy based on an LSTM.
I
think it was replaced with a transformer model. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the big problem with an LSTM model in a situation like this is that it's going to have bottlenecks in terms of training. So if you're using, it'll be a little bit slower. And even if you do have like a GPU and you can parallelize your training, because you have to step through things in a time order, it's still going to train a little bit slower than a transformer-based policy. But yes, please. I'm not going to stop you.
There's also, all policies use like a common Python class as an interface. The Python class is called policy. I think there are also a couple of blog posts about this interface actually, and you can just implement your own policy to maybe like a very simple rule, like whenever there's a first message, just say hello, or actually some sophisticated machine learning model. And then in your Raza model configuration, you can just like put the Python module path of this class of yours in this configuration, and Raza will just load it and will just treat it as the other policies.
Yeah. From Chris, it's kind of annoying that we have to list intents actions in the domain. Why not just detect them? I many times forgot to add them in the domain file. I understand for slots forms responses though. So what Chris is talking about is in your domain file, you have a list of all your intents and a list of all your entities?
I think it's a good question. I think I have seen very many opinions on this topic, actually. I know Greg, also a huge supporter of not having intents and actions in the domain file. To some degree, I think it makes sense kind of as like a spelling check, right? It's very easy to mistype it maybe in a story or action, and then you won't know that you kind of hit the wrong action because you don't have like a like a true source. When you have the domain, you can kind of use this as a sanity check for your intents and actions. But I agree that it can be annoying. I think it's great user feedback. So please raise this.
Yeah. I agree that it's annoying, but when I come into other people's assistants, I am very grateful just to have a list of things and not have to scroll through the training data. Assam says, is there any way to generate stories without writing them from scratch? Ooh. Interactive learning, maybe? Might be what you're looking for?
I mean, this is this entire generating data topic, right? So the issue is if you have like some fixed rules which generate stories, then they will follow like hard-coded pattern, right? Which looks great because you have a lot of data after generating these stories. But on the other hand, this data might not really like reflect like reality. So it might not work for your actual users. So this is why we always try to encourage use conversation-driven development, right? To learn from your users, let them have a conversation with your assistant and then kind of design the stories based on that. So Raza Interactive is pretty good for that, I would say. So either Raza Interactive in the command line or in Raza X. I know there's also a tool from Bot Society where you can also drag and drop conversations and then kind of generate stories based on that, but it would all just use this as a start and then always would go towards giving this to users and learn from like how they are using your assistant.
Yeah. Getting it in front of people. Have users write conversations or use user conversations as your stories as soon as possible. It's going to be less writing from scratch for sure. Amita says thanks. Glad to help. Randy says, I don't quite understand the fine-tuning aspect. It looks like it only works for NLU changes, but not when you change your stories. Is that right?
It shouldn't be right. Yeah, so fine-tuning means that instead of training a model from scratch, it will just like, it will take the existing model and just fine-tune the already trained parameters with the additional data. Just a couple of more epochs, so you don't like have to train like another 100 epochs, but just maybe for like 10 more. So this should speed up training, but this will still mean that all of these components still have to be trained, right? It doesn't skip training for a certain component, just means that you can use less epochs for these components.
If you only update the NLU model though, and you're not using end-to-end, will the fine-tuning also update the core?
So end-to-end will always kind of, so Raza core will at this point always use the Raza NLU features as input. Definitely the head policy will use that as an input. So you can't really just change NLU as far as I know. But there's some peculiarities around this in the code as far as I remember.
I know that recently, and it might have been that I changed stories rather than NLU, but I was retraining a model, and I don't know that I was fine-tuning. I might have been retraining from scratch, but it retrained either just the NLU or just the core, and I don't remember which.
I think in a couple of months we won't talk about like this difference between like NLU model and core model anymore. I think everything will just melt together and be with like one Raza model. I think the historic split will go away because like in reality it's already kind of merging in the code base.
So hopefully that helps, Mandy. If it seems like a bug, I might post about an issue on the GitHub forum. I might post an issue on GitHub. What's the GitHub forum? I don't know. That's nothing.
There's a specific form you fill actually out, right? So if you go to GitHub and create bug, then it gives you kind of like a template.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Hussein says, diet is good, but it takes a lot of time. Do you have like a lot of intents? Because I find that, well, I guess it depends on how big your assistant is. I don't generally find that diet is like super slow.
I think it definitely got slower. I think diet is slower than some previous components you had in there.
Yeah, that does make sense.
But we're definitely working on like optimizing performance. So we have also, so I'm in the engineering squad, so I'm working less on the machine learning components, but recently we really tweaked, for example, how we read training data. I know there was this research data set called multiverse, and before it changes, like we couldn't read it in like finite time. And now we can just read it in 4 minutes, which is pretty awesome from like not reading it ever. So I think this should hopefully already speed up your training if you have a lot of training data. And yeah, we are also working on optimizing these components. So we caught a couple of memory leaks recently, also putting checks in place to avoid this in the future. And yeah, there will be more optimizations coming.
So keep your eye out for updates. And Amina has a question that I'm going to go to the docs to answer. If I want to use BERT or Camembert, the French version of BERT, how can I use it with Raza? And the answer is... I'd recommend the Hugging Face Transformers. Is Hugging Face 2 words for real?
I don't know.
I thought it was 1 word. Huh. Where would that be? That would be in the config, yeah? Pretty sure. Featureizers.
For components, right?
Yeah. Language models. Do I remember exactly where in the docs it is? There we go. Apparently, yes. Good job. So I would recommend using the Hugging Face integration that we have. They have, they've dealt with making it usable without having to build a bunch of stuff yourself. And then they've got, their own library that they maintain, but it's, I would say, fairly up to date with sort of major models. And I don't remember off the top of my head if they have Camembert, but I would be surprised if they didn't. Yep, there we go. So, Hugging Face.
Also explain in our documentation. So if you go to components, so in the left navigation tree, you go to concept, config, pipeline components, and then to featureizers, there's a component called language model featureizer. And then you scroll a little bit down and you can see there's BERT, GPT, GPT-2, and all sorts of other models which are available and which you can try out, and they're all based on Hugging Face.
Sorry, I don't know if that's picking up for you, but loud things are happening outside where I am. Yeah, so that's what I do, and hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Chris says, about the listing all the intents entities in the domain. Thanks. You're welcome. And Munika, sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly, says, can you explain how to use the 2-stage fallback and its customization? Do I remember where fallback is in the docs? No.
I think it's best practices.
Conversation patterns?
Yeah.
Okay. I always just search, almost always. And then the 2-stage fallback. Do you wanna talk through this?
Yeah, I actually kinda invented the two-stage fallback policy. Right. No, it's not completely true. But like I think like after 3 months, we had a customer kind of bringing up this idea of having like a more sophisticated fallback, and yeah, and then Philip just kind of gave me this task to implement something along these lines, and that's what's now the two-stage fallback policy. So it obviously went through a couple of iterations since then. Yeah, so well, the normal fallback is a bit like one-dimensional, I would say, right? So if your user has a problem and you just ask them like, hey, please rephrase, this can get annoying for your users very quickly because it just makes your assistant seem very dumb. So the cool thing about the two-stage fallback policy, or the two-stage fallback now, it used to be a policy, so that's why I'm always saying two-stage fallback policy. The cool thing about that is that it actually allows your users to kind of put your assistant back on track, right? So it gives the users suggestions based on the intent ranking by an LU. So it says, hey, did you mean this intent, or did you mean this intent? And then the user can select that or rephrase. So makes it way more interactive, and yeah, makes it feel more natural for users. Why do you need customization? Well, by default, Raza doesn't really know how to explain your intent, right? So you can only say like, did you mean this intent greet, or this intent goodbye, which is not especially like user friendly. So it's better to have like a custom action where you actually say, okay, in case you want to suggest the intent greet, it says like, hey, did you want to say hello? For example, things like that. So this is why I would definitely recommend customizing it. There should be, as far as I know, for example, the Raza demo uses the two-stage fallback policy, two-stage fallback. So you can look into this repository, and it's also covered in the docs. Yeah. I also wrote a blog post back in the days about it, but that's about the two-stage fallback policy and not the new two-stage fallback. So the new two-stage fallback is kind of triggered by the rule policy, so it's working slightly different, but same conversation path.
Yeah, and then we'll pull up the rules so you can see what that looks like. Not feedback, fallback. Do you want to talk through what it's doing?
Yeah, so once you actually have a message with low NLU confidence, it will just ask the user, what did you mean? Did you mean this intent or that intent? And then either like the user can just select one of these intents, ideally, for example, using buttons, and then the conversation would just go on. The alternative is that the user just denies. In that case, we ask the user whether they can rephrase the message. So basically just like ask them to state this again. And if we are unsure again, then we offer them buttons once more. If they deny again, then we kind of escalate and say, okay, like, sorry, we're really off at this point. We don't know what you mean. Then it also depends a little bit on what you think is best for your assistant. You can just either restart the entire conversation and try to start from scratch, or you have some sort of message or feedback form you want to direct the user to. This is really up to you what you think makes the most sense for your target audience.
I think this one in particular relies on a action as well.
Yes, it's no longer a policy, right? So that's it used to be a policy, and now it's just part. There should be an act, like a rule actually, which triggers it, like I guess fallback.
I'm just clicking wildly. Yeah, I think we looked at the rule, and I'm just trying to find what the action looks like.
So this means like we have a component in our model configuration called Fallback Classifier, and this will always predict the intent NLU fallback whenever the intent had a low confidence. So this makes you enables you to just write a rule for this. In this case, whenever we have this NLU fallback, we will trigger this action on two-stage fallback, which is implemented as a loop or form. And I guess somewhere in the custom action code, there should be an implementation of the action two-stage fallback.
Yeah, this is default fallback. Okay, and here's the fallback called by this two-stage fallback policy. So if these are triggered, then in this case, it's just going to be like share an utterance that was written during the bot. It's like, hey, do you want to restart? And shows you a button that you can hit to restart. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Monica. Amina says, the assistant always uses the last model saved. Can we specify a model, not the last one? Yes. In Raza X, there's a little... In the sidebar, you can select which model you use, it's just like a checkbox, and you change the active model. And in the command line, it's just like a flag that you point to the model. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's in the docs.
Should be just dash model or the last. If you just add the model as last parameter, this should also work. Yeah. This is default fallback, but there should be more code. Yeah, when you scroll down or up, there should be something like action affirm.
It's if you do Raza train help, I believe it'll get you more information on the specific thing. I almost always just look it up in the command line because I can't remember dash commands.
The custom actions for the two-stage fallback policy are called action default ask affirmation. So this should also be overwritten in Raza demo. And action default ask rephrase. So you would definitely want to override the ask affirmation one just to have like very like nicer prompts for your intents, because otherwise if you have an intent, I don't know, like some cryptic name which makes sense for your developers, but well, they probably won't make sense for your users, right?
That was about the default fallback actions. So adjusting them to be more helpful.
Yeah, I would definitely do so.
Nick says, Isam says, thank you. You're very welcome. I hope that helps. Good luck on your project. If you use the fuzz.token set ratio or fuzzy wuzzy, what advantage or drawback would you suggest when the user asked a question and got response? Fetching data from the CSV or Excel or JSON, etc. depends on the score set. So this is a little bit outside of core Raza. It's more just sort of asking about handling text that doesn't exactly match things that you're looking up. And I'm not entirely sure what information you're looking for here, Nick. If you're looking for like the specific values to set, it's going to depend on your users and the things that they're asking for and how close they can get. So I would probably do some experiments with CDD and see what threshold seems to work okay. All right. Amina says, when I test my assistant, I have to open 2 terminals, one for the actions and leave it running, and another one for Raza shell. Is that how it's supposed to be?
Yeah, it's supposed to be like that. The reason for that is, well, also kind of this is the architecture of Raza, right? So, for example, yeah, the Raza action server is we provide the Raza SDK, but this is just a reference implementation, right? So you could also implement the action server in any other language you want to. For example, if you feel more comfortable in Java or JavaScript, then you can just implement the server, kind of, yeah, working with the interface. For example, I did it once myself for Go. Actually implemented an action server in Go. Yeah, back then was a lot of pain, but actually since Raza 2.0, it's way easier to implement an action server in your favorite language. And yeah, I mean, also if you think about running this actually in production, it's nice if you can actually scale these components independently and also don't rely on each other. So yeah, this is purely an architectural decision, I would say, for how the Raza open source framework works. I can understand that it might be nicer for you, especially if you're running from the command line interface, to just run everything at once. Yeah. good point. Especially for debugging or testing, I can see how this makes sense.
Yeah, but that is currently the way that it works. So you're doing it right, Amina. Hussein says, is there any way to get the training time and response time for Raza NLU? You mean like for benchmarking?
I know that Vincent recently added a feature which exposes certain parameters, but these are like rather embeddings and very important. I think the, how you call it in a model, not the lookup, but the query. Anyway, like it exposes some interesting features which kind of like lets you investigate like what the model is, kind of which features or which parameters the model is looking or focusing most upon. Don't think this works for timing, but what you could do is just like run the Python API of Rasa open source and then profile it with your favorite profiling tool. And it will always depend a little bit on your configuration, on your model configuration, right? How the timings are. So if you have a very small pipeline with pre-trained embeddings, it might be a little bit faster than probably diet. And yeah, but we're also constantly optimizing this. But if you have some hints on what to improve, I'm very grateful.
I think for model training, TQDM is a tool that people will often use to keep track of the time. And if you're asking if you can estimate before you train the model how long it's going to take, no, not easily. I mean, if you could do that, that would be like the future of machine learning right there. But it's a little hard to say. And then I like time it for just like benchmarking runtime. I probably wouldn't use time it for I'd use it for inference time, but I wouldn't use it for training time because it requires doing it multiple times.
Python has some pretty good like profiling tools. I've actually recently used them for the YAML loading, yeah. And you can just run your Python code or whatever command, and then you get like this .prof file. And then there are like different tools again to view them, and then you can see which command takes how much time. So for example, if you do the for Raza train, then you could see, okay, the training data loading takes so much time, and that like
nice.
this, like the training data loading consists of this and that. This is super helpful because you could just focus on the longest part, fix that one, and then run it again, focus on the next longest part. That's a very easy approach to fix performance.
Yeah, so hopefully that gives you some good things to look into, Hussein. Was answering Amina's question. Monica says, thank you, Tobias and Rachel. You're very welcome. I hope we helped. And Assam says, and this will probably be the last one we have time for because we are a little bit over an hour at this point. I'm doing a chatbot for a telecom company, and I need to do classification about the user, whether they're a VIP user. Then I will respond faster than if the user is not. How do I do that in Raza?
As an engineer, I wouldn't do it in Raza, to be honest. I would do this based on a deployment. So I would have some, because also you don't want to interfere this, right? So if you say, okay, these are like users who don't pay, and if we are out of capacity, then we simply don't serve them or serve them slowly. Then I would just have like these deployments completely separate and would maybe have like a load balancer just in front of everything, which kind of routes users based on their status. So I wouldn't handle this in Raza, to be honest. Yeah.
And if you are just asking, how would you take a piece of information and have that affect the conversation in general? A slot with influence conversation true would be my recommendation. Can I find this by clicking through? Oh.
Yeah, just any slot with like influences conversation true. Yeah. Well, you could do like if the slot is true, then you call a custom action which just sleeps. But yeah, I probably would not do this. This seems hacky.
All right. Mateus says, very good in Portuguese, I think. Thank you. Yeah. Do you have time for... Oh, okay, this is not a question. Mohammed says, I just started using Raza days ago. It's so amazing, and although I have to customize the input channel, it was easy. Well, happy to hear that. I think Tobias had more to do with making it easy than I do, but well, it's nice to hear. Good note to end on. All right, thank you so much for joining, everybody. Sorry about the video getting cut into 2. It is outside my control and very frustrating to me, and I'm sure to y'all as well. But thank you, Tobias, for sticking with us and answering questions so helpfully, and it was a delight to have you on Office Hours.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed hearing from Tobias, good news, you can do that tomorrow morning as well. Well, morning for me. We've got some more information in the YouTube community tab to sign up and learn more, and there'll be Q&A, and you'll be talking about all the great new features in the latest release. So it should be a good time. Make sure to tune into that. And yeah, I will be back tomorrow, right after that, reading the paper that's in the title of the YouTube video right now. I'm going to fix it. But it's a systems paper about a chatbot for Brazilian government virtual school, which should be really fun. I'm looking forward to reading that. And I always love reading about what people are building with Raza. So, thanks so much. Amina says that helps a lot. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, and I'll see you tomorrow. And Tobias will also see you tomorrow. So talk to you then.